Good evening and welcome to The Point. Initially, before we start our discussion, we'd like to extend our sincere condolences to Egyptians worldwide for the loss of one of its greatest military men. Egypt lost today former Defense Minister Field Marshal Mohammed Hussein Tantawi. May he rest in peace. And we pray that God gives his family and loved ones the strength to overcome the great loss and heal their grievances. This evening on To The Point will be addressing the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi just finished addressing this session a few moments ago. We'll be addressing that session and other leaders that took part in the assembly thus far. With us to discuss that is Dr. Hassan Wagih, Professor of Political Science. A pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Let us start off first with maybe look at President Sisi's speech. The president addressed a number of issues. He addressed COVID-19 issues, calling on the world to consolidate efforts to confront the pandemic, and reminded the world of the dire need of deprived countries of the vaccine, highlighting that the developed countries really chose to retain most of the vaccine and deprived the others. He also addressed environmental issues. He addressed the human rights portfolio. He addressed the terrorism portfolio, the Palestinian question and conflicts in this region, and in addition to others, but maybe this is really the highlight. How do you see most of the president's address? He was really calling and highlighting and stressing on the need to consolidate the efforts, be it in health, social, political, conflict, or other issues. How do you see the messages delivered by the president?
Actually, it is well done. Actually, it is very compatible with the report, our shared experience, our shared agenda for the future by the General Secretary of the United Nations. And actually, it addressed, as you have already mentioned, the number one problem for the entire world, according to many circles, which is the climate change. But on the local level, yes, he addressed several points like the issue of health, the issue of human rights, and what is very important also, he mentioned something about the win-win approach when it comes to the Renaissance High Dam and the water file, and how Egypt exerted all its efforts to play the win-win. And Egypt's questions are very legitimate to have an agreement based on, he said, based not only on the legal rights, legitimate rights, international law, but also from an ethical point of view, etc., etc. So this file, the message regarding this file was extremely important because it is of a main concern to the Egyptian people. We are not supposed to have someone wants to have development, as they say, on the account of lives of others when it comes to the water issue. Also, when we are talking about the discourse of the president, as I said, it is very compatible with the report made by the UN from session 75 last year. Many efforts were exerted from 193 countries, and this was crystallized by the report. And this report is very important, and it is a turning point when it comes to reform in the United Nations. The United Nations has two scenarios. either break down and going into crisis slides all over the world in so many of the files we have already mentioned,
Yes.
or to save what could be saved. We are coming too late as a world voice, as a United Nation entity. So I think that the president already and the Egyptian leadership with all its representative in the last decision, in the last session,
The
they
75th
really,
session.
they really asked for the reform of the United Nations to be effective, to implement international law, and to get people to play win-win. Also, there are so many things that we have to talk about, like the General Secretary mentioned something about conspiracy theories and disinformation, and he said something new to the human rights. He said it is in the core of human rights that we should make a stop on these conspiracy theories and all these kind of lies on the internet, which really created the divided societies all over the world, not in one country or another.
Yes.
So he said this is a new counterpoint when it comes to human rights. Also, يعني, it is very important to know that there are lethal weapons these days, and the United Nations is no longer united. There are parallel nations making parallel zero-sum games, spoiling all the efforts by the international community. And I think the Egyptian leadership is very aware of that, like to bring things back into correct order when it comes to win-win, legitimacy, international law, etc.
The president, in his speech with regards to the Nile water, he said that the other party is adamant on using the approach of fait accompli. Is there a reversal of that policy? Can the president's speech today lead to any consolidation of efforts within the United Nations? Because so far we really haven't achieved much on the front to address that issue with Ethiopia, that water is life for Egypt and we will not be compromising its security and stability.
Yeah.
Can the United Nations push forth towards finding a solution soon to that problem?
I think this should be the case. Actually, Egypt has exerted what was called and what was named and what was described and classified as a strategic patience. Egypt exerted a great deal of effort, self-regulation, not to be carried away by the Ethiopian propaganda and the provocations which all Egyptians have already felt and all over the world. And even one of the top military officials in the United States made a statement to that meaning. It is not only an Egyptian saying this. So I think that this strategic patience is very important, very needed. It is based on cooperation and an attempt to create solidarity among all the nations of the world to have peaceful solutions. But we don't want it to play the threat games as other people play. But when it comes to life and death, of course, the avenues that Egypt are trying to exhaust peacefully, reasonably, considerably, for African countries, for African brotherhood and sisterhood, and for all these kind of things, I think the speech also is very compatible with this strategic patience.
The president addressed, speaking of peace, he referred to the boiling points, that this region is very, very volatile, and that even the countries that are rich are really suffering, and he referred to Iraq and Yemen. And he highlighted that interference in Arab affairs is rejected. Your comment?
Yeah, of course.
And link that to the Palestinian question, please, as well.
Actually, it is, yes, no one sovereign country accept that that any power would interfere in its internal affairs or in its sovereignty when it comes to issues of land, issues of what we are doing and what we are not doing according to their own whimsical agendas. So I think that it is very important when it comes to the Palestinian question. I believe also that one of the press representative asked the United Nations Secretary about the Palestinian issue, and he mentioned that the United Nations is very consistent in having a viable Palestinian state, having the solution, two states solutions, and all he reiterated that the United Nations is very consistent when it comes to its previous resolutions. So I think that this is about the Palestinian issue.
Worth noting that U.S. President Joe Biden said he will work adamantly on achieving peaceful purposes for all. He kept stressing on the need to address common threats. Does that mean that we will be addressing terrorism?
Yeah.
Does that mean we will be addressing those who harbor, support, and initiate terrorism? Does this mean we'll be calling on causes or conflicts in the region that are contributing or that are being used as a pretext even to carry out certain terrorist actions? Will we see a change in U.S. policy, in your opinion?
Hopefully, Egypt is keen to have everyone reconsidering what they want to say when it comes to bringing justice, bringing peace based on justice, when it comes to sincere fighting for terrorism, because Egypt has taken on its own shoulder the fighting of terrorism as no other country has done.
Yes.
So I think Egypt needs sincerity when it comes to this file. And there is a big question, by the way, being raised in the General Assembly discussions about, and that there was a question asked to the General Secretary, what are you going to do when it comes to Afghanistan? Would you deal with them? Would you consider them as members? Their leaders are listed as terrorists.
Yes.
So how would you do something about that? What is your attitude? I think that was a very loaded question for him. And he said, when it comes the moment, the right moment, we will say something about that. Here, there is a liquid situation when it comes to what's happening in Afghanistan. And nobody, even in the internal discussion within the United States itself, people are divided among what happened. Was it a defeat? Was it something out of their control? Or was it an agenda and a victory? Nobody knows anything. There is ambiguity. And we have to disambiguate that whenever an opportunity offers.
We have with us on the line voice of Dr. Hani. We have Dr. Hani Abdelaziz, the former UN Assistant Secretary General. Dr. Hani, can you hear us?
Yes, hello. Good evening, madam.
Good evening, Dr. Hani. Can you tell us, from what you've been following of the 76th session of the UN, how do you see the agenda, especially in addressing critical issues? Are world leaders seeing eye to eye on priorities?
Yes, let me start by thanking you and your panel for the effort made to bring to the attention of your auditors the question of the 76th General Assembly. As you know, the United Nations was created after World War II and is a result of the war, where major winner of the war, have control on everything in the organization, starting from its funding, etc. But coming back to the actual session of the General Assembly, I like to indicate essentially that the General Assembly is not, and I repeat, it is not a decision-making body. The decision-making body with binding resolution is only the Security Council. The General Assembly is a sort of forum where participants, the 193 member states of the General Assembly, can meet and exchange opinions about the world situation. And today they have a huge agenda distributed among the 6 major committees and some other working groups to discuss. It's an opportunity to heads of state, prime minister, minister of foreign affairs, ambassador, etc., to express their point of views and probably take some resolutions. But such resolutions are, I repeat, not abiding to any to anybody. It's an opportunity to discuss, to express point of views, but not to take decisions which are going to be implemented. I would say that the question, the major issues, I imagine, in my opinion, after reading the agenda, are essentially attempt to revitalize the question of environment, of protection of the earth from the several challenges happening to the nature and to the environment. I think this is one of the major issues to be discussed. The return of Afghanistan as a member of the United Nations, in my opinion, does not cause any complication. Is going to happen because we all know that this withdrawal from the Americans, seems, I reiterate, seems to be an organized matter. And today, the Emir of Qatar, for example, called for the separation. I say the separation of international assistance, international aid from political issues to Afghanistan. I think the question of environment is going to be one of the major issues to discuss. Maybe the questions of peace and security worldwide to be discussed verbally without expecting any sincere resolution pushing towards a resolution of the so many conflicts existing, particularly in our continent in Africa. That's how I see the actual situation. Another subject which I think President Sisi, the head of state, has mentioned in his statement to the General Assembly is the question of the overall development, particularly for Africa. The continent has suffered tremendously from the pandemic situation and accumulated larger debts, and it has been a policy of Egypt to attempt alleviating the burden of this additional debt on the continent.
Yes.
My opinion, alleviating the debt will happen to a certain extent, particularly towards Sudan, where Egypt has been exercising tremendous effort. But essentially, it is the role of African countries to cooperate among themselves in order to progress towards sustainable development. That's my overall opinion in brief.
Speaking of alleviating the burden, President Sisi in his speech called upon the creditors to work together to revisit the debt and aid for ailing economies, especially in the African continent. How do you see that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This appears to be now a standing policy or standing strategy of Egypt, which the president has started during his last visit to Paris 2-3 months ago, and he puts among the first priority in this to alleviate the debts towards Sudan. And I think it was supported, by the way, by the President Macron of France, who is trying apparently to convince other leaders in Europe to follow this path and to come to concrete, implementable results. Because one of the problems we face at the General Assembly of the United Nations and at such high-level meetings is that there is tremendous declarations, tremendous pledges to provide, do this and this and this, without a real mechanism to follow up on implementation of the declaration made either at the General Assembly, either on bilateral relations. But coming back to the General Assembly, I see it still important. I don't want to diminish its importance. It's still important as it allows member states, heads of state, to meet each other on a private basis, on a bilateral basis, and collective basis too, to try, to find solution to the world problem, including and mainly, in my opinion, the question of alleviating the debt and sustainable development. It is high time now to put an end from multinational and transnational corporations in the world from milking the wealth and the natural resources of our continent and of our countries.
Before we wrap up, the UN Secretary General today warned that a divided world really can lead to a destruction, a comprehensive destruction. He warned of the subdivisions that we're witnessing today. On that note, is there anything that the UN can do to mend the divisions, to really contribute efficiently to conflict resolution? And the reason I'm saying this because the issue of revisiting how the UN operates has been raised a number of times.
You're putting the major question existing today. I believe I'm an expert in conflict resolution. It is my main work at the United Nations. And the question is, and I said it at the beginning, the organization is the result of the World War II. Therefore, you have the five exactly major winners of the war who are controlling the world politics and the world organization. However, there has been in between until now the emergence of the losing countries of World War II, say for example, and essentially Japan and Germany, who have no permanent seat in the organization to project their ideas and push for it. There is also other emerging countries coming to the scene, like India, and it's not very much possible because of the competition with China. You have South Africa, which is the 8th or 9th most industrialized country in the world, almost at the same level of Italy, who is emerging and wants to have, a better say on the world economics and all of this. I think Secretary General Guterres, when he spoke about the divided world, it was a sort of philosophical approach, because the division is on different fronts. The division is facing the pandemic. That in developed countries, over 70–80% of the population has been vaccinated, whereby in Africa, I don't know exactly, but it is, in one digit, in 1% of the population. This is a divide. The divide is also in the increased tension in the Indo-Pacific region, and we saw it recently between France, Britain, and the U.S. concerning the sale of nuclear submarines, and how China is taking it so badly. Because
Yes.
this region of the Indian Pacific region is to become the priority for the foreign policy of the U.S. and major powers. Not the Middle East again, I'm really sorry to say it. But this is the reality. We need to be very pragmatic and look at the situation. Also, the situation in the Middle East is among the subjects on the agenda as every year, but I do not expect any serious project, serious advancement of the subject. Also, President Biden mentioned today in his statement that he supports the two-state solutions, but that the existence of an independent Israeli state in Palestine is something of essential strategy to the U.S. The division also exists, as we saw it, between France, Britain, Australia, and the U.S.
Yes.
Therefore, the Secretary General spoke in general, in a generic word,
Yes.
in a generic fashion, to reflect the different type of division executive today. That's personal opinion. I don't know what he meant exactly, but I believe this is right.
Yes. Dr. Hani Abdelaziz, thank you very much for your fruitful input. Dr. Hassan, I'm sorry, we have a couple of minutes left, but since you raised the issue of the effectiveness of the UN as an apparatus for governing and resolving conflicts, your comment.
It is very important that it is very important to say that the United Nations declared its intention to widen the participation, to widen the decision-making process. They will hold two successive summits among the leaders, one the coming year and one the after, so as to reformulate the structure of the United Nations itself, to reform it with its university of, is very important university of the United Nations. The capacity for youth, the capacity for all those actors when it comes to civil society, private sector, official states, foreign ministers, etc. They would like very much to open up the floor for much more wider processes, for more effective decision-making processes. And I think that we have to prepare ourselves to have Egypt and the Arab world intervene in a very scientific way,
Yes.
with a lot of representatives, that really cover all this wide scope that's being intended to reformulate and reform the United Nations, because in its real capacity, it is unable to do so many things. And if I have one thing to say, I would like to pay condolences to the former president of Portugal, who used to be the first high representative for Allied of Civilizations. And I think he came to Egypt and he visited all the universities. He stayed with us in Al-Azhar University for 6 hours, discussing professors, discussing the Grand Imam, the president, director of the university, and the young students, the undergraduate student. And it was a very, very important message that that man really was a passionate human being and a very capable one, who won the admiration of everyone who got to interact with him. And he left our world,
Yes.
so we pay condolences.
Dr. Hassan Wagih, thank you very much for joining us this evening
most
on To The
welcome.
Point. I'd like to thank you, the viewers, and we'll see you same time next week. Until then, good night.